The second factor that motivates privatization is the decline in the quality of, and in some cases, the reductions in funds available to the public sector. So, when education quality drops, the supply drops. The supply of quality education, the supply of effective education drops, and this then becomes a supply-side pressure. Also, when funding drops, because without funding, you are not going to be able to do all the good things that you may want to do. So these two things make the supply-side pressure. With the pressure from the supply side, again, the private sector has to step in and take some note. Many parents feel that the local public school is inefficient in providing education of the type that is most needed. And what do you think is the type of education that is most needed? Quality and effective. Something that prepares children today for their future, not our past. We can't teach and help students learn based on what we did 20, 30 years ago. It's for their future. This dissatisfaction is reported by parents in very basic terms, such as the inability of the school to guarantee their children's safety. Today, safety and security are also concerns, and with the government or public schools not being able to provide that safety and security, parents are concerned about sending their children to such schools. So you have to look at not just the learning outcomes, but you're also looking at the other ancillary needs that must be fulfilled by schools in order for parents to opt and choose to send their children to such schools. This inefficiency and this lack of safety and security concerns individuals and parents particularly, and that is why they again then begin to look at the private sector side schools and see what they have to offer. In some cases, enrollments have expanded much faster than funding. Yes, population has grown, and with the increase in population, school enrollments have increased. So we have the same structure, the same size classroom, which was really meant for 20 students, now has 40. And how is that going to work? And so, with no funding available, the supply, the need for more classrooms are not met. And this overcrowded classroom is not what many parents would want, where their children should go and learn. This resulting overcrowding, large classes, and double or triple shifts for the delivery of education. So we could just put children in the same class, or we could have, okay, first shift, second shift, third shift. If we are running schools in shifts, then we can't have a 6-7 hour day, because no one is going to come from 6 p.m. onwards to a school. So we have to see, are we able to supply through the public sector, through the government sector, the needs of education for our students? Part of the perceived decline in quality may be consequence of a fall in per student funding. If the government funded per student and not just a lump sum, then maybe as students increase, the schools could ask for more government funding because it's per student. So now our student population is double. Are we going to get double the funding? If not, then it's extremely difficult for government schools, government school teachers to teach and help students learn in such conditions. Higher education often has a high cost per unit. Governments expect students to bear an increasing financial burden for their higher education. We know if we compare primary, secondary, and tertiary education comes at the highest cost, even in the private sector. So with the cost of tertiary education going high and the students or the families responsible for bearing a large chunk of that cost of higher education makes parents move away. And so, where are their children going to go? They need to continue the tertiary education as well. These pressures have thus prompted a number of privatization-type reforms to include private payments by students, the creation of private institutions, and resource allocation based on performance. So if we look at these three conditions, okay, private payments by students. Students find donors, find individuals, find philanthropists who are willing to pay for their education. It's not an easy task, but can be done. The creation of private institutions, we've seen lots of private institutions come up, and a lot of these private institutions offer scholarships, work-study programs, loans, and those kinds of things that help students get their tertiary education. And finally, resource allocation based on performance. Are you performing? Are you a top A 4.0 CGPA student? Are you a 2.5 student? All that will make a difference. And therefore, when people pay, they want to pay for students who make the most use of their funding. Another explanation for the perceived decline in quality may be that the public school system has reached a capacity constraint. With rapid growth of population, government schools may be overcrowded, therefore private school providers are needed. We've already talked partly about this, that with the increase in population, the private schools and most of the government schools are also at a limit constraint. There are no more students they can take. That's not to say that the private schools don't overcrowd their classrooms. They do it too. But then they provide alternatives. The government school crowds the classroom, but it fails to provide alternatives for students. In the Dominican Republic, for instance, private schools are subsidized if they enroll low-income students where the public schools are at excess capacity. So if in the Dominican Republic I want to send my child to a government or public school and there is no space there, and I have to opt to send my child to a private school, then the cost of that private education is subsidized by the government. The government steps in and pays part of it. So somewhere along the line, it still becomes the responsibility of the government to make sure that children receive the education they need.